You know how like every culture has those stories about how everything began?
Creation myths. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Those explanations of how the universe, the earth, everything came to be. Well, we're diving into one of the most famous ones today, the Genesis creation story.
And it's not just a story, right? I mean, it's echoed through history, shaping how we see the world, religion, art, even like, think about it, the 7-day week.
Oh, wow. Yeah, right from Genesis. Okay, so how does it all start?
With a beginning, but not just any beginning. Genesis describes this state of dot nothingness, a void, darkness everywhere.
So it's like a blank canvas, but before you even have the canvas.
Exactly. Full of potential, waiting for something to happen. And then there's this powerful line. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
Order from chaos.
Yeah, and it's interesting, that idea isn't unique to Genesis. Ancient Mesopotamia, they had creation myths too, like the Enuma Elish. Very similar thing.
So it was like a common human question, how did we get here?
Totally. Imagine back then, no telescopes, no science explaining the sun and moon. These stories, they help people make sense of things.
Right, to find order when everything seems chaotic. So day one, light and dark get separated. But even there, it feels deeper than just like turning a lamp on, you know?
Oh, absolutely. It's like Genesis is setting up this moral dimension right away. Light and dark, it's the foundation for good versus evil, right?
Which plays out through the whole Bible and beyond.
Exactly. It's laying the groundwork for those big questions humans always ask: good, evil, what's it all about?
Then it gets even more interesting. Day two, we get the separation of waters. Waters above and waters below. Now, I gotta admit, that sounds a little strange today.
It does, doesn't it? But we have to think like the ancients did. Their cosmology, their view of the universe was totally different.
Different how?
Picture this. The sky. They imagined it almost like a dome, a solid thing holding back this giant ocean above it.
Wow, so the sky is like a giant ceiling keeping the water out.
Exactly. And the earth, a flat disk with another watery abyss below it. So waters above, waters below. It makes sense in their worldview.
A sky ocean. Wild.
Uh-huh.
Okay, then day three, we get some more familiar territory.
Yeah.
Land separating from the sea, plants appearing all over.
Right. It's like watching the stage being set, piece by piece. First light, then sky and water, then land and plants. Very deliberate.
Purposeful. Like each thing is preparing for what comes next. Which, now that you mention it, what about these days of creation? Are we talking literal 24-hour days here?
Ah, now that's a question that sparked debates for centuries. Some people take it literally, others see the days as metaphors for longer periods.
I mean, if God's creating everything, couldn't he do it instantly? Why the need for separate days?
Right. Well, some people think those days could represent vast stretches of time, like what we understand now about geological history.
So maybe more like epochs than just regular days.
Exactly. It reminds us that interpreting these ancient texts is complex. We have to consider the science, but also the understanding of the natural world back when it was written.
So we've got this foundation, this sense of order coming from chaos. Light, sky, land, plants. That still feels pretty empty, doesn't it?
Like a stage set, but no actors yet, right?
Yeah.
Don't worry, it's about to get a lot more lively as we move into days 4 through 6.
Like you said, setting the stage. But now it's time to bring in the actors, right?
Yeah.
Days 4 through 6, things really start happening.
Exactly. It's like Genesis shifts gears from separation to abundance. Day 4, we get the sun, moon, and stars.
Which, I mean, talk about your big reveals, but they're not just pretty lights in the sky, are they? They have a purpose.
Absolutely. They're there to mark time, to separate day from night, govern the seasons. It's setting the rhythm of life in motion.
Right, like a cosmic clock. Which, now that you mentioned time, doesn't that get kind of tricky when we're talking about God?
So,
Well, God's supposed to be eternal, right?
yeah.
Outside of time. But creating things in days implies a change, before and after, even for God.
You've hit on a huge point. That idea that God acts within time had big implications for theology. It changes how people understood God's relationship to the world, even to us.
Wow. So even something as basic as time gets you thinking deep.
Right. It's all connected. But let's get back to the creation story itself. We've got a universe. Now, what?
Day 5, it's like Genesis just explodes with life. Sea creatures everywhere, birds in the air. Then day 6, the land animals get their turn.
All those amazing creatures. And Genesis really emphasizes how many different kinds there are. According to their kind, that phrase gets repeated a lot.
According to their kind, why is that important?
Well, it might seem straightforward, but that phrase has caused centuries of debate because the idea of fixed, unchanging kinds of creatures, Well, it kind of clashes with what we now understand about evolution.
Ah, right, like how species change over time, adapt.
Exactly. It's a great example of how these ancient texts can be interpreted in different ways. The writers of Genesis were working with what they knew about the natural world, but through the lens of modern science, it takes on a whole new meaning.
So we've got light, sky, land, plants, this incredible array of creatures. But something's still missing, right? The star of the show hasn't taken the stage yet. It's like the whole universe is set, the stage is lit, the music is cued, and then finally, here comes the headliner: humanity.
Yeah, and it's not just another species being added to the mix, right? There's this whole different feeling when Genesis talks about the creation of humans. It's like,
Yeah.
this is important.
It's that in our image thing, isn't it? Like out of everything God creates, humans are the only ones made in his image. What's that about?
Yeah, it's one of those things theologians have been debating for centuries. It's a powerful concept. We're talking about an intangible quality, something of God himself reflected in humanity.
So it's like we're not just creations, but reflections of the Creator.
That's the idea. It suggests a unique connection, a special status for humans,
Yeah.
but it's not all easy street from there.
Because with special status comes responsibility.
Exactly. This is where we get what's often called the dominion mandate. Humans are given responsibility for creation.
Dominion. That word always seems a little loaded, like
Yeah.
we have permission to just do whatever we want with the planet.
I know what you mean. And it has been misinterpreted that way, for sure. But if you look closely at what Genesis is saying, it's more nuanced than that. It's not about absolute power. It's about stewardship, taking care of something precious.
So less about ruling, more about responsible caretaking.
Exactly. Think of it like being given the keys to an amazing garden. You wouldn't just bulldoze it, right? You'd tend to it, help it grow, make sure it flourishes. That's stewardship.
Yeah, it's a completely different mindset. So even in this paradise, this perfect creation, there are still some rules, some responsibilities.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, even in paradise, humanity's relationship with nature undergoes a change. God gives humans permission to eat plants and then animals.
Right, to sustain themselves.
Which on the surface might not seem like a big deal, but it does introduce the idea of consumption, humans impacting the natural order, even if it's just to survive.
So it's almost like a warning, a reminder that things can get out of balance, even with good intentions.
It definitely gives you something to think about.
It really does. So we've gone from a formless void to a universe bursting with life, and finally to humans, created in God's image, tasked with taking care of it all. No pressure, right?
Right. It's a pretty amazing story when you think about it. And it really makes you think about our place in it all, our purpose. What does it mean to be human in this incredible creation?
That's a big question. And speaking of big questions, you said you had one for our listeners to ponder as we wrap up today.
I do. Genesis tells us that after all this creating, God rested. So here's the question. What does it mean for God to rest? And what does that tell us about the importance of rest in our own lives? Something to think about. Until next time.